My name is Claire, and I'm 27 years old. If you had told me a year ago that I would fall in love with my best friend, I would have laughed in your face. Not because it sounded impossible, but because I had spent most of my life convincing myself that I never would. Love, to me, was always something that belonged outside of our friendship, something fleeting, complicated, and full of uncertainty. But love has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it, and sometimes it comes in the form of the person who has been beside you all along. Nathan and I had been best friends for as long as I could remember. We met in college, two strangers thrown together by chance when we were assigned as lab partners in our first chemistry class. I was the overachiever, the one who always had her notes in order and a plan for the future. He was the charming, carefree guy who barely studied but somehow always managed to ace his exams. We were polar opposites in every possible way. I liked order. He thrived in chaos. I believed in plans. He believed in spontaneity. I guarded my heart. He wore his on his sleeve. But somehow, we fit. Over the years, our friendship became the one thing I could always count on. When life felt overwhelming, when relationships fell apart, when the world around me shifted, Nathan was always there. He was my constant, my safe place, and I never once thought about what it would mean to lose him until the night everything changed. It was a cold evening in early December. The city was alive with Christmas lights, the air crisp with the promise of winter. Nathan and I had spent the evening doing what we always did, grabbing dinner at our favorite diner and walking through the streets of New York, talking about everything and nothing. I remember laughing at something he said, my breath visible in the cold night air. He had this way of making everything feel lighter, as if no problem was too big, no sadness too heavy. But something about that night felt different. There was an unfamiliar tension between us, something unspoken hanging in the air. I noticed the way he looked at me, really looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. Or maybe he had been looking at me like that for a long time, and I was only now realizing it. As we reached the front of my apartment building, we stood there in silence, the city buzzing around us. The streetlights cast a golden glow on his face, highlighting the softness in his eyes, the way they held something I couldn't quite name. I should go inside, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Yeah, he murmured, but neither of us moved. Then, before I could process what was happening, he stepped closer, just a breath away. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of him against the cold night air. Close enough that my heart started pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. And then his eyes flickered to my lips. Time slowed. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was me. But before I could stop myself, our lips met. It was hesitant at first, like we were both afraid of what this meant, afraid of breaking something fragile. But then, something inside me shattered. The walls I had built, the denial I had clung to, the years of pretending, everything crumbled in that moment. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer, and I let myself sink into him, into the warmth, into the feeling I never knew I had been waiting for. The world around us faded. The city, the lights, the cold, it all disappeared. It was just us. Just this moment. And, for the first time in my life, I realized I had been lying to myself. Because this was everything. The next morning, reality crashed in like a tidal wave. I woke up to missed calls from Nathan, my heart pounding with something I couldn't quite name. Panic, regret, fear. I wasn't ready to face what had happened, so I did what I always did. When something scared me, I ran. I ignored his calls. I avoided our usual spots. I convinced myself that the kiss had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, a product of the winter air, and the nostalgia of the holiday season. But deep down, I knew the truth, because every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel his lips on mine. I could still hear the way he whispered my name against the cold night air. I could still feel the way my heart had raced, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to love. And that terrified me, because if I let myself love him, truly love him, I risked losing the one person I couldn't live without. But what I didn't realize was that by running, I was already losing him. Days turned into weeks, and we barely spoke. The silence between us was unbearable, heavier than anything I had ever known. Until one night, he showed up at my door. I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't been sleeping, like he had been carrying the weight of something too heavy. "I can't do this anymore, Claire," he said, his voice raw, breaking. My heart clenched. "Do what? Pretend that kiss didn't happen? Pretend that you don't feel what I feel?" His voice was steady, but his eyes were pleading. "I have loved you for years, Claire, and maybe you don't love me back. Maybe this is all one-sided, but I can't stand here and pretend I'm okay with just being your friend when every part of me wants more." Silence. My chest ached, my hands trembling at my sides. "Nathan," he shook his head. "If you don't feel the same way, just tell me. I'll walk away, I swear. But if there's even a part of you that feels what I feel, tell me. Please." I couldn't breathe, because the truth was, I did love him. I had been in love with him for longer than I even realized. So I stepped forward, closing the space between us, my hands shaking as I reached for him. And in a voice barely above a whisper, I said the words I had been too afraid to say. The relief in his eyes was immediate, overwhelming. And when he kissed me again, this time I didn't run. This time, I kissed him back with everything I had. Because love isn't something you plan for. It isn't always neat or easy. Sometimes, love is your best friend. And sometimes, a single kiss changes everything. This is the story of how I fell in love with my best friend, of how fear nearly made me lose him. But more than that, this is the story of how love finds you, even when you're not looking. Because sometimes, the person meant for you has been beside you all along.